All right, you guys, welcome back to Reignited and our Twin Charged Magnum project. Now you are joining me mid-project right now. You can see that I have the rear differential out of the vehicle, and that is because I'm going to be installing a limited slip in this thing. We don't want a one-wheel peel, a one-tire fire, a one-legger. No, we want both rear tires spinning, especially at the track. I've never actually done this before. I'm excited to do this process. First thing we've got to do is we've got to get this rear cover off to expose the carrier itself, and then we'll go from there, all right? Okay, I gotta say, I'm pretty fortunate to have access to a lift and everything, because this job without a lift would be a huge pain in the butt trying to get this thing out of here. I basically had to disassemble most of the knuckle assembly here, get rid of all the rods and everything to allow the hubs to swivel out far enough to get the axles out. And then I had to drop the rear of the subframe down almost a foot, and the reason for that is because of this stupid upper bolt right here. This sits right behind the spare tire well here, and there's no way to access that or get the bolt out with the subframe in place. So you have to drop it down. So I'm hoping this is going to be a fairly straightforward process right here, because I'm not actually replacing the entire carrier with the limited slip style. Rather, I'm installing an aftermarket limited slip, which basically looks like this. Very small. It's just a couple of steel blocks with some springs in between them. And I've had good luck with this style of limited slip in the past, so I'm hoping I'll do so on this one as well. Plus, it's much simpler because I won't have to reset up the rear end or anything like that. I can basically just install this piece and put this thing back together, put it back in the car. That's what I'm hoping anyway. I haven't actually done the job yet, so let's get into it. Now, I did already drain this rear end before, but that matters not. You're always going to have a mess when you pull a cover off of something like this, because not all of it is going to drain out. There we go. Hey, actually not bad at all. This job just got to be a lot more of a pain in the butt. Basically what I'm looking at right here is you need to remove the center diff pin on the carrier itself, and it's in the way of the ring gear. So the ring gear has to come off in order to get that diff pin out. In order to get the ring gear off, we actually have to remove the carrier entirely from the housing. I was really hoping to avoid that on this job. That's really, dang it. This job just got even worse than it already was. Okay, I now need to figure out how I'm going to do this to proceed with this job. All right, we are back after a brief little hiatus there. I had to come up with kind of a game plan of how I was going to attack this thing. Now, the first thing I did was went ahead and knocked out the axle seals here. Now, these are just a press-in fit, so you get a little screwdriver on the back side, give them a few taps, they'll pop right on out. And I'm gonna just go ahead and reuse these because I don't have any new ones and they're not leaking, so I'm just gonna put them back in for right now. Now, once you get those seals out, there are some gigantic snap rings in here that you need to remove so you can actually get this carrier out. So I had to call in the big dogs here. I had to go to work and get some big time snap ring pliers. Now, I have some decent sized snap ring pliers in my arsenal. Nothing compared to this. I knew we had this at my work, so this is going to make this job so much easier. This is what I'm going to use. Check it out. Goodness. I think the better part of the valor here is to put on some safety goggles. Aha! Woo! Don't get anywhere near it. Success! Somewhat anticlimactic, but that's exactly what you want when you're working with a snap ring. You do not want any sort of drama. Ooh, that one came out nice and smooth. Very good. Man, these bearing races are just incredibly thick. Oh, there we go. I knew there had to be a specific angle that it had to come out at. All right, now we need to go ahead and take the ring gear off here. I gotta be honest though, also, the fluid looks basically brand new inside this diff housing here. So honestly, this vehicle looks like it was really well taken care of. So obviously that's a great sign. All right, I'm really hoping that I can just tap this ring gear off and not have it be kind of a press fit, because I don't really want to try to be heating it up or anything like that. I just want to tap this thing and have it come off. There we go. So we've gotten our carrier basically disassembled here. We got the ring gear off. The next thing we need to do is actually get that differential pin out of there. I think there's a roll pin I need to smack out of place there. But before I do that, I really can't stand working in a dirty environment. I don't like the fluid and the various dirt that's all over this table right now. I'm gonna clean that first, and then we'll get that roll pin out of there. Hey, roll pin's actually moving. That's a great sign. I don't like to spit them all the way out if I don't have to. I like to try to leave them in place at least a little bit. That way you can just drive them right back in. If you pop them out, sometimes it can be a bear to get them to actually fit back in where they're supposed to go. Yep, and I just popped it out. Okay, now that we've got the roll pin out, we're gonna go ahead and drive the differential pin itself out. This should not take very much effort at all to actually pop this out. If it does, there's something else wrong. There we go. Now you'll notice that this diff pin itself does have a couple of flat sides on it. So the flat side faces up so you can put your roll pin back in when you're all done. Now with our diff pin out of the carrier here, basically our little limited slip here with the springs inside just needs to slip down into this area right here, and then we'll reinsert our diff pin and put everything all back together again. Now the installation instructions for this do state that you may have to do some modification of the actual gears themselves inside the carrier, and that was the case with mine. It was a little bit too tight. I couldn't quite fit the limited slip in between the two gears, so I had to take a little bit off the face of them. The best way to do this is with a flap disc on an angle grinder, and then I use my belt sander to get it back flat again, because you want these surfaces to be as flat as possible to have as much surface area as possible for this limited slip to work. So now we've got these gears modified, and it doesn't really make much difference to take a little bit off of the face, because your loading is all happening on the gear teeth themselves, not the face. So anyway, no problem there. Let's go ahead and get these installed. The only tricky part about this whole deal is that you have these spider gears here on the sides of the carrier, and you have to line them all up and get them all kind of moving as one and get it back to where you can actually get the diff pin back through it with those in place. It's a little bit fiddly, but it's not a big deal at all. Let's get them reinstalled. Now the key here is lining them up identical side to side so that when you roll the gears in, they will actually match each other. I'm kind of thinking that I didn't quite get this one right. No. Let's try that. That looks better. And looks like I'm about a tooth off. So a little bit more. There we go. Nailed it. So you can see it's not really that big of a deal. It's just you kind of have to work both sides at once to make sure you get these guys evenly in here. Now once you get this back together again, we'll go ahead and get our limited slip installed, but you'll want to get that diff pin reinserted here before you go spinning these things around, otherwise they can pop right back out again. All right, we've got our limited slip installed here. One thing you do want to remember is to remove those pins and this little crossover bar on each side of this thing. These things are just loose on here, so if you forget to take those off and you slam this thing back together again, you're gonna have a bunch of random pieces floating around your rear diff, which is really something you don't want to do. So make sure to get all of those removed. All right, let's get that diff pin reinserted and get our roll pin back in place. So there we have it. We have our limited slip installed in our rear differential. Now it's time to just start putting everything all back together again. Now I'm sure there's some of you out there who are going to be saying, hey, you have this thing all apart already. Why are you not replacing the bearings while you're there? And the truth is, these bearings are in fantastic shape. There's no reason to replace these at all. They look absolutely perfect. This vehicle has around 105,000 miles on it. There's nothing wrong with these bearings. And in fact, these are OEM bearings. They're from Germany. They are of fantastic quality. So if I were to get a set of aftermarket bearings, there's no question in my mind that they would be of inferior quality to what's already in the vehicle. And being as how these are in perfect shape, there's no reason to replace them. So it's going right back together again. Okay, before we put our carrier back into our housing, I want to go ahead and get this housing cleaned up. And that especially means getting rid of all this silicone residue here on the actual housing itself and on the plate, the end plate that covers it. Now I'm going to use a tool here. This isn't sponsored or anything like that. I originally saw this tool on an Instagram post by Speed Academy. And being as how I'm a tech for a living, I was like, I have to have that tool. Essentially, it has this little carbide end on it that is used for cleaning a machined surface. So basically you're cleaning a machined surface of silicone just like this situation is. So I'll show you guys this tool. I think it works really good. I'll leave a link down below, and it's super cheap to grab off Amazon too. All right, so real time there, that was about a minute of cleaning that up. If you've ever done this kind of work before, you know what a pain these machine surfaces are to actually get clean. Now, obviously you still see some of that silicone residue there. That's trapped in the really fine scratches here from when they actually milled this thing flat. You could go ahead and clean all that with a roll-lock disc if you wanted to. There's no point. This surface is now perfectly flat and ready to be resealed as it is. So I love this tool. I think it works absolutely fantastic. Like I said, there'll be a link below. Now, because we are reusing the original bearings here, the one thing we do want to make sure of is that we are putting the correct cup or bearing race with the actual bearing that it came from. Now, being as how these bearings are in such spectacular shape, I honestly don't think it would make a big difference if we did mix them up, but we're going to go ahead and get them back the way they were just to make sure everything is as it should be. I gotta say, it's kind of a fascinating design how tight this whole situation is. There's only one way to actually put this thing in here, and I think I'm doing it wrong. No, that's also wrong. All right. Oh, there we go. Yes, that makes more sense. Does it? I'm not sure. I don't think that's right either. How did I get this out? I might have to watch the video back to figure out how I got this out of here. Oh, okay. There's no way. It's got to go in this way. There we go. Ah, success. Time for the snap ring pliers of doom. I gotta say, these are pretty dang cool though. Am I still frightened of them? Of course I am, but that is awesome. So finally, we've got our center section completely reassembled here. Time to go back into the vehicle. So from here, it's just a matter of reassembly. Not really that interesting. I'm just gonna go ahead and put this thing back together again. And next time we take it for a drive, we'll make sure that this thing is spinning both tires. We need to move on to our next area of concern. Now, you guys might have heard on that test drive that there was a really bad rattling noise coming from the vehicle. The vehicle runs extremely quiet, which is awesome. It's kind of exactly what I was going for. Very tame, very subtle when you're just cruising around. I think this is going to make an excellent street vehicle. You can hear there is a rubbing noise, and I think that's due to one part of the exhaust that must be contacting the frame somewhere. My wife said it sounds like the car is falling apart when you're inside of it. I know what it is though, it's just the exhaust contacting the body at some point. I had a pretty good idea where it was, and I was correct. So you will be completely unsurprised to know that this really tight radius angle here where my downpipe tries to clear the strut tower is too close to the strut tower itself. The engine mounts provide enough movement to where the exhaust is actually contacting the strut tower. I believe that's the complete source of all my rattling noises, is this one area. There's about, I'd call it 3/16 of an inch clearance between the downpipe and the strut tower. So that's something we need to address. Okay, I went ahead and stuck my flashlight down there so you guys can see what I'm talking about. That is the clearance we're looking at between the exhaust and the strut tower. Now, the correct thing to do here would be to take this downpipe off and actually just dent in the downpipe right there so that we have that clearance, because only an idiot would main their strut tower. But in fact, you're actually looking at that idiot right here, because the idea of denting in my beautiful downpipe that I built just doesn't appeal to me. I would way rather maim my factory strut tower than to do that. So it's not a big deal. I honestly don't really care much about this car. It doesn't really mean a lot to me personally. I have no problem with modifying that strut tower. Now again, we're not going to compromise the integrity. All we're basically doing here is scalloping out a section of the corner there where that exhaust was hitting. I'll go ahead and plate that back in with a piece of even thicker steel. This thing will be just as strong. There'll be no questions there at all. Should be a fairly straightforward thing to do, and I won't have to maim my beautiful downpipe. All right, already making some good progress here. You can see that really, this is just a big pocket behind here. You got your mount for your upper control arm right here, but back here is just empty space. So as soon as I plate this back up again, this will be just as strong as it was before. All right, I think that turned out pretty good. A little bit of paint there and it's fairly unnoticeable. But now we have a scalloped shock tower. Really tough to see with the black paint there, but regardless, we should have a lot more room. Let's get that downpipe reinstalled. Okay, downpipe is reinstalled, and now you can see we have at least a ½ inch of clearance around our exhaust now to the strut tower. Really like how that came out, fairly unobtrusive on there, and I didn't have to damage my beautiful downpipe. All right, one more project I got knocked out here is the skid plate here. Again, these cutouts, they do hang pretty low. I didn't want them getting ripped off on like a driveway entrance, so I wanted to build a skid plate deal here. Went ahead and put some riv nuts in the actual chassis itself, both of these to it, built this whole skid plate assembly. Turned out pretty cool, I think, and then went ahead and tied it in the front here to the transmission cross member as well. So should be plenty sturdy. Also, it is angled up a little bit right there, so if it does hit something, hopefully it'll just skip off the back here like an actual skid plate would. This is made out of 3/16 plate, which is, to be honest, it might be a little bit overkill, but I'd rather have it be that way than the other way around. So again, this skid plate, unfortunately, I tucked it up as tight as I possibly could to these guys without it rattling against the exhaust. It's definitely not, it's pretty low on the vehicle, which is unfortunate, but hopefully we won't hit it too much. I will say that in the time I've been driving around the car, I haven't touched these cutouts yet. So hopefully it'll be the same with our skid plate here. But again, really happy with how that came out. I think it looks pretty nice overall. Should be some good protection for it. It's kind of tough to see right here, but there is about a ½ inch of clearance here between the exhaust pipe and the skid plate. So our last item we need to address is that you guys heard on that test drive, there was a ton of belt slip, a bunch of belt squeal, quite embarrassing. And also it means that the supercharger is not acting as it should be. It's not generating the boost that it should be. So I was kind of going back to the drawing board on that. My initial thought was, hey, this e-torque tensioner is just not quite strong enough for this system. It's got a fairly weak spring in there. So I kind of went down a rabbit hole of trying to get a stronger spring or something to do with a stronger tensioner there, even going so far as to building a complete manual tensioner for this system. But the entire time I was kind of overlooking a basic principle, and it's really come back to bite me now. And that is that I put the tensioner on the drive side of the belt system. You always want to have your tensioner on the slack side of the belt system. So imagine it this way. Your engine is turning in this rotation. Well, this side of the belt is always going to be tight because that's the drive side where it's pulling the belt onto the pulley itself. And my tensioner was on this drive side, so the belt was always as tight as it needed to be on this side anyway. There's no reason to tension on this side. What you need is after it passes through the crank pulley, you got the slack side over here. You want to have the tensioner on this side. That's what's going to keep you from having that belt slip issue. So once I kind of realized that I was making a fundamental mistake there, I was like, okay, how can I adjust this? How can I add a tensioner onto the slack side of this belt? I literally have been dreaming about tensioners for the last few days because of all the different tensioners I've gone through, all the different revisions I've gone through, and this is critical. I have to have this fixed before we go. And honestly, guys, time is really drawing short. As of this video right now, I think we have 19 days left before the event. So I'm starting to freak out a little bit. I'm getting very anxious. There was so many thoughts running through my head, but I did come up with an alternate solution. Now, if you guys remember, if you've watched this video for a long time, watched this project for a long time, when I initially came up with this belt routing system, I came up with an alternate belt routing. Now, the initial routing that you saw me use on here, I was using the factory e-torque tensioner, the hydraulic one, strictly as an idler, not as an actual tensioner. And I was just using the secondary tensioner for that system. However, the way in which I routed the belt meant that that tensioner was always going to be acting on the drive side of the belt, like I said. But I had also come up with a different style of belt routing that used the factory tensioner in the way it was supposed to. I just didn't like the way it looked overall. That's why I didn't go with that one. However, I went back and watched my own video and looked at that and realized I would be using the hydraulic tensioner on the slack side of the belt as it was designed. And wouldn't you know, I had already purchased a belt that was the correct size for that particular routing if I needed to switch to it. I just kind of forgot about that because it was so long ago. So I grabbed that belt, I tossed it on real quick, just tested it out, and it's looking very promising for the belt slip side of things on the supercharger. However, due to this routing itself, there's not very much wrap on the alternator, and that is definitely an issue. I just ran this thing. We're getting a ton of slip on the alternator pulley itself. Belt is getting very hot because of that. So I need to find a way to get more wrap on the alternator itself. If I can do that, I think we're gonna have this problem licked. Now look, I would love to finish out this video by taking this thing for a test drive and showing you these improvements we made with the limited slip differential, get the skid plate on there, and the new belt setup. But we're just coming down to the wire here. I have too much to do and I've got to get these things done. So I literally don't have time. And unfortunately, I will not have time even to take this thing to the drag strip before the event. I just looked, the schedule just does not work. They don't have a test and tune in the 2 weekends essentially that are available to me before I leave. Once again, we are going to be leaving for this event with 0 test time on the vehicle. Not what I wanted, not what I was looking to do. I wanted to bring a more finished product. But would it be a race car if you're not bringing in something that's completely untested? Definitely not ideal, and I can't say that I'm all that excited about it. But I hope you guys are excited about the project and the fact that we are trying to make some improvements to make this car as effective as it can be in the time that we have. We will continue to refine this thing and really try to dial it in after the event. But right now, this is just nose to the grindstone, trying to make it to the event. If I can do that, if it can make it through the event, I can relax a little bit and then we can really focus on making this thing the car that it should always be. For now, you guys, I really appreciate you guys staying with me. We'll see you next time on Reignited.